Malaysia Green Building Council, also known as malaysiaGBC, is an organization that promotes green building programs, technologies, and design practices, aims to make Malaysia an eco-friendly and sustainability place on Earth. malaysiaGBC was founded in May 2009 by a group of passionate building consultants, academia, and representatives. Even since Malaysia's building has increased, the efficiency of resources used in each building was built with green in mind. malaysiaGBC is also supported and associated with most of the top industry institutions. In the year 2015, malaysiaGBC became an established member of the World Green Building Council and known to be the only organization in Malaysia to be supported by the World GBC. malaysiaGBC continues to be the platform that networks, promotes, educates, and most importantly, develops the sustainable, built into the land of Malaysia. With much more passionate industry professionals, we can make Malaysia a greener and better place on Earth.
Right, good sound to begin with. And welcome to the evening show. I'm your host, Stephen Poon. This is our series 9 of Cross Discourse, organized by malaysiaGBC Academy from Malaysian Green Building Council, MGBC, and supported by Mila University. What a good evening to all the audience out there. We are live on YouTube, and a big wave here to all the audience out there. At this time now in the virtual room with me are the regular team of MGBC coming out on this evening, which is profitable sustainability, aligning incentives with climate resilience. We are working towards to the support UN SDGs, dedicating this live podcast to 2 specific goals. Climate governance directly contributes to SDG 13, climate action, by establishing mechanisms to mitigate climate change and enhance resilience. At the same time, it supports SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, by promoting green economic opportunities, sustainable business practices, and job creation in emerging low-carbon sectors. Together, these SDGs ensure that climate action not only protects the environment, but also drives inclusive economic growth and social well-being. We have a sustainability investment expert and the founder of Planetary, a Kuala Lumpur-based advisory firm. He recently served as the interim CEO of Eurochamp Malaysia until January 2026. Prior to this, he established the Asian presence for Pragma Finance, a UK private credit provider specializing in large-scale ESG projects. With over 30 years of experience across Southeast Asia and Australia, his deep expertise spans management consulting, strategy, post-merger integration, and cross-border M&A, which is a mergers and acquisitions advisory. His distinguished consulting career includes leadership role at global firms PwC and Kearney. Kearney, yes, that's currently, yes. Alongside running his own boutique advisory businesses in Jakarta and Singapore. So please welcome Carl Godoris.
Hi, Dr. Stephen. Thank you for having me. I feel intimidated by my own background.
Wow, nothing wrong with this. I like to share, with the people, especially my audience out there. We have a special guest, Carl Godoris. Actually, I have been looking for you. Actually, to be honest, since last year. But I think there was a time you were just appointed as a Eurochamp, I think the CEO. I think you were really busy. I couldn't really get through you for some reason. But this time I really, actually, how I see you. I think the other day we had a briefing for the star judging things. So that's the time I said, I need to look for you again. So that's the reason. But thank you very much. You agree of all these this dialogue, and also which is the things that we can share this together, especially for our audience based on your expertise. So yeah, how are you doing actually, Carl? So what have you been doing for the day today?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm okay. I had a special day because for the first time in 2 years, I had a short round of golf this morning with a senior banker here in Malaysia. So I thought, what a way to start the week, because usually I don't start my week like that. And the rest of the time, I've been working away on some of the projects that I currently handle. So it was a combination of a bit of pleasure and a lot of duty. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I know that you have been. I know that you're traveling a lot. So you're just like running up and down, north and south, west to east. So say something about this. I know that you're really busy actually. So that's the reason I quite a few times try to allocate the time. Our common time so to come together to have a chat.
Okay.
So, but thank you very much actually, Carl. Really appreciate it because I know that you're really busy man, but you managed to so-called find time for me. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much actually. So, Carl, thank you so much for joining us for this Discourse session. Let's get started to set the scene up before we get into this discussion. I remember we talked about this survival economy the other day, so I really get into this very deep, which is the last 2 weeks. I was really research about all this. So I have a lot to ask you about these survival economy things. Let's set the leeway before we get into that. The survival economy focuses on reshaping our economic landscape so that market, incentive, regulatory compliance, and planetary health work together instead of against each other. So transitioning from simple ethical application to core business competitive advantage is the central theme. So let's look at the policy and regulatory framework. How can governments transition from punitive regulatory enforcement to proactive frameworks that make green technologies commercially scalable?
Okay, so that's quite a handful. And I assume when you mean survivor economy, you particularly refer to the current few months we've been going through with the conflict in the Middle East and how that affects global energy markets and supply chains in general. But I also look at it, survivor economy, as an economy that supports the survival of the planet, because we're talking about sustainability here. When you say, governments moving away from punitive regulations to more proactive frameworks, I'm actually not 100% sure that the governments have punitive frameworks right now. I actually sometimes wish they did. Because if you look at purely in areas of sustainability, and it's not just Malaysia, it's a majority of countries in the world. I mean, a lot has been done in sustainability, decarbonization, and so forth. But it's not like companies or people are being punished through regulation by not necessarily decarbonizing. Because most of what is being asked from organizations is to report their current status and their plans going forward. But for me, when I say I wish there was more punitive regulation, what I particularly mean is, and that's something we have in Europe, is that ultimately I think, and I'm not the only one in the sustainability community, that thinks that if you really want to shift the needle, you have to move to a carbon tax format economy, which is punitive, but at least will push everybody into action. Nevertheless, proactivity has also been in place, right? Not just here, but in many countries, governments gave tax breaks or subsidies for organizations and also individuals who either invest in renewable energy, who invest in EVs. So I think, yeah, this is a very long topic, but broadly speaking, I think you need a combination of punitive and proactive regulations to keep the focus on what we need to do within the survivor economy paradigm that you just mentioned.
And Carl, you mentioned about low carbon earlier on. So let's look at the profit motive and the business alignment. How can business today cleanly demonstrate to its shareholder that low carbon resilient strategy yields a stronger commercial position of the long term?
Well, there's a few angles to that, right? It's either isolating a company or also looking at a company being part of a bigger economic and societal framework. So there is sufficient evidence that, and I'm recently working, for example, a lot in the financial services industry with Malaysian banks and so forth, looking at how they report on sustainability, because the Malaysian regulations in that sense have become a lot more stricter this year. But there's ample evidence globally that financial institutions, for example, who go down the path of decarbonizing their portfolios get rewarded for that by financial markets, right? There are green premiums available, companies, banks who clearly lower their carbon footprint of their loan portfolio or exposed to lower borrowing rates themselves. So there is evidence. At the same time, I think if you particularly look in Western economies, companies that do not report on their decarbonization initiatives, the decarbonization framework, are already struggling in many ways. Either they don't find the right talent to work for them, or certain segments of their customer markets are dropping them. So in that way, back to the survivor economy topic, I believe there is enough evidence to show that in the long run, it is profitable. I would rather say in the medium term. The key challenge is, of course, like with so many things in business, the short term is not necessarily more profitable, because the expenses always precede the benefits. So I can understand, particularly when economically things are a bit more challenging, that companies say, well, look, we will minimize whatever we need to do for sustainability because it's not good for our current bottom line. But for me, there's another aspect to that. We always talk about the P&L side of sustainability, but let's talk about the balance sheet, right? Let's talk about value protection, right? Are you willing to invest in the right measures that protect the value of your business over a longer period? I'll take one example, which is particularly relevant for Malaysia, which is the risk of floods. And these are not my statistics, these come from the Malaysian government. But in the 1970s, Malaysia had maybe 3 major flood incidents every 10 years. Now we have 2 per year. And the trend is clearly going further direction. So a lot of organizations and companies are operating in areas that are flood prone. And the issue is not just protecting the building, it's protecting the supply chain, which means protecting their employees, protecting their customers and suppliers. Exactly. So I think as a board of an organization, if you are concerned about the longer term value of your business, you have to look into these things. And talking to the banks, there's clearly a trend where banks say, look, I give you a loan for 10 years, but where are you going to be in 5 years if suddenly a major flood hits again Glen Mary or Shah Alam? Is that going to kill your business or not? Am I going to get my loan paid back? So these kind of dynamics are starting to develop. Yeah.
Okay, great. Actually, there's a full of insight. I have just I managed to take down quite a few notes, so I probably need to Richard, think it over and also try to come out how I respond to this later on when I do the conclusion with the audience. Okay, let's tag along like what you have just mentioned. I'm going to delve into a little bit deeper. Climate governance that ensure regulatory requirements are in line with market motivation turns environmental regulation into a critical aspect of business operation. So, which is I managed to pick up some of the points you just made earlier on. With the formulation of the comprehensive policies, governments remove uncertainties around green technologies, leading to fast adoption and equal competition for green solution. In the meantime, innovative companies have found that adopting green strategy is an optimal way to operate because of greater efficiency and climate risk reduction compared to the traditional method. So the transition from being driven by regulation to purposeful climate action makes businesses more competitive since sustainability needs to better economics. So from the shifting mindset, what do you think? How can corporate leaders successfully transition their teams from viewing sustainability as a legal checkbox to embracing it as a core driver of commercial growth?
Yeah, I have a quite philosophical answer to that. How do they deal with it? By looking in the mirror and asking themselves the question, if in 30 years from now, I'm talking to my grandchild, am I going to tell that child, I wish I did less to protect the planet? No, right? You're going to, no, but it strikes me. I talk to a lot of listed companies, even in Malaysia, and you have boards where the board say, look, we do not just want to invest in sustainability compliance. We want to know whatever we do and invest in, that we can use that to create commercial values. And then you have other companies as large and as public as the first group who say, well, our board just says we do whatever is required by law and everything else we will see 10 years from now, right? And so I think this hits a very fundamental issue that you see across societies. And yeah, before the call, you asked me not to talk about politics, but unfortunately, I think a lot has a bit changed for the worse with the new administration in the United States, because suddenly a big part of the world kind of says, see, if even the Americans don't believe it, why should we do it, right? And so here
well, put it this way, Carl, it's not all the Americans don't believe it. It's just a certain people that don't believe it.
No, but it drives very important shifts in markets, right? You see most of the American banks have pulled out global banking alliances for sustainability. You see large European multinationals operating in the US certainly having to tone down their sustainability programs because it doesn't look good in that market. And then the question that everybody else is asking, well, why would I then invest in it when I'm operating in Malaysia or in Europe or wherever else it is you are? It's ultimately about, do you believe it or do you not believe it, right? That it is necessary. And it's a scientific issue that we're dealing with, right? The assessment of climate change and dealing with it is a scientific problem. And you know this better than me because you're a professor. For But what I mean is, for the last 200 years or more, society has followed the scientific method, which means if someone develops an idea or an invention, it gets challenged by peer review, and this is how things move forward.
Yep.
The fact that people discover that the climate was warming has been peer reviewed 1,000 of times, but it's enough that a few politicians say without any scientific backing that there is no climate change, and half of the planet is believing them, right? So if you're aboard, you believe in science for any aspects of your business, except for the science of the climate affecting the future value of your business. So it's the tone is set at the top, and if the tone at the top is not there to push the teams forward, it's going to be very difficult. But I find it very encouraging when I talk around town, meaning KL, that there's actually a slight majority of companies who believe that they have to do something, rather than others who say we will do as little as needed.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm glass is half full for me. Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the policy in terms of policy and innovation. What specific elements of well-crafted governance are most effective at helping early-stage green technologies survive the commercial value of death and achieve global scale?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of startups who survive the valley of death but never reach global scale, right? So it's not a condition. But I thought a lot about that. Because if you say global scale from a Malaysian point of view, then you probably think most about what are the areas or the industries where Malaysia is significant at a global level, where further innovation and technology could shift the needle and make us a world champion, right?
But this is what the majority of the companies thinking, actually.
Yeah, well, there are two that I'm personally dealing in these days, where I think, well, this is an area where Malaysia could show the rest of the world how things are done, provided that there's a bit of regulatory push and that there's a slightly deeper venture capital market to support it. But the first one is biomass. Particularly, Malaysia generates every year 70 million tons of empty fruit bunches in palm oil. And there's only one other country that makes more, which is Indonesia. But you have actually, as part of your very globally significant industrial activity, a waste stream, which is actually an asset, right? You can turn it into all kind of derivative products. You can turn it into biogas and so forth. There's so many applications. Now, there's devil in the detail. Logistically, there are certain challenges. But if I were a government, I would make that a top priority. And I would say, look, we're going to become a world champion in recycling biomass into all kind of sustainable products. We have a few dozen engineering universities. There are some investment funds. So this is one area. The second one is also an area I'm involved in lately, is, look, for the right reasons, Malaysia is very proud of being one of the global hubs in the semiconductor industry and surrounding electronics. Now, these supply chains generate waste that can be perfectly recycled. And from your electronic waste, you can recycle gold, platinum, silver, copper, nickel, you name it. And you can do this to the highest standards possible. So rather than what has been done recently for the government to say we ban any import of electronic waste, you say, no, we're going to lead the world in showing how you can sustainably recycle electronic waste, because, like it or not, with electrification of our economies, we are going to increasingly produce more and more electronic waste. So instead of ignoring that, why don't you take that as an opportunity to be a champion? So this is my 5 cents worth of how to go through the valley of death and reach global scale, if you like.
Okay, Carl, let's look at the performance age here. What data or case study best demonstrate that low carbon business strategies consistently outperform traditional high emission models over a long term horizon? Any case studies?
You mean personal case, as which renewable energies work best, you mean?
I mean, it can be any case study. I mean, it doesn't have to be your personal. Can be the things that you see that around. Because we are not informed, we are not aware that. Probably you want to share with the audience, or probably you have some kind of case study based on your personal experience.
Well, yeah, there's plenty, right? I mean, you can talk about Brazil, where every car
Okay.
drives on ethanol, which comes from their sugarcane industry. So this is actually it's not totally carbon neutral, but it is sustainable format. I believe in Indonesia, the diesel has to contain a quarter biodiesel-based source, so that works. There are, if you look across Europe, there are increasingly countries where majority of the time the power supply comes from wind energy, right? So it's not like one solution for the whole world, right? So renewable energies are heavily dependent on local situational benefits or conditions and resources. Malaysia has no wind really to talk of, so you're never going to invest heavily in wind energy, but you have a lot of sun. So you see, for example, the largest renewable energy or the larger player in solar energy in Southeast Asia is a Malaysian company. Why is that? Because you have a good combination of focus, availability of resources, and a regulatory framework that actually supports that, right? So these are a variety of case studies, but there are plenty. There are plenty.
Okay, Carl, let's look at the market incentive here. How can governments and financial institutions better align short-term market incentive with the long-term reality of climate necessity?
Okay, so it's a personal opinion, which I share with a few people, but I think you have to be a bit heavier on the introduction of carbon tax. It's being introduced this year now for a small selection of industries up to a certain level. But you have to, I think, push harder on that. The European case has proven that, but you cannot do it in isolation. You have to combine it with a properly function market for carbon certificates, right? Now we have in Malaysia a voluntary market, which is set up by Bursa, but it's very small, right? In terms of the amount of tons of CO2 that are being traded there, and also the liquidity. So I think a kind of closer cooperation between government and financial institutions, where you say, look, we're going to push harder on carbon tax, because that provides the business case for companies to do something, because if they don't, they're going to have to pay that tax. At the same time, we will impose on our financial institutions that those companies who then actually do something with it get financed at better conditions than companies who do not. So yeah, it's a good question that indeed the combination or the collaboration between governments and the financial market is quite critical in this. Yeah. Because technologically, everything is there, right? It's just a matter of scaling
exactly.
it up. Yeah.
Okay, I just refer back some of the point I picked out earlier on. You talk about the competitiveness and how do they compete with each other, the global competitiveness here. In the context of the global economy, how do companies rooted in purpose-driven climate action gain a distinct competitive advantage over compliance-only peers?
Yeah. Well, being purpose-driven as a company is not just a factor of sustainability, right? Any purpose-driven company will benefit. I will give you an example. You might remember or know the Swedish car brand Volvo, right?
Yep.
Their philosophy was always no matter what the regulation requires us to do, we want to build the safest cars on the planet, right?
Yeah, of course,
So
yes, they do.
they invented the safety belt before the safety belt was legally required in many countries, right? So in their case, that was their main value proposition, right? That was their main purpose, to be the safest car on the planet. Other companies came later and said, look, by law, it is required to use your safety belt. So, of course, when we build a car, we will make sure there is a safety belt. So this is just an example I'm bringing up because, in my view, you can extend that into sustainability. I'll give another example in milk, right? You have companies who produce milk for end consumers and say, look, we will make sure that our milk always complies with local safety and health requirements, right? You have other companies, say, I'm not promoting them now, but say, for example, Danone, they have an entire research center where they say, look, how can we adapt our milk products such that the next level of health benefits is provided? That's their purpose. It's not required by law, right? So you can extend the same to sustainability, right? You're in the real estate sector, and there's a couple of very large companies operating in Malaysia, and this is the Green Business Council, so it's a good example. I've met with boards of real estate companies who say, look, we don't care about floods, we will just make sure we comply whatever the law says. And there's others who say, look, we always want to build the most sustainably possible condos because we think people will pay a premium for it. Whether that's true or not, they don't care, they just want to build them. So that's their purpose, right? And in many cases, that purpose translates, if not in short term, definitely a long-term company value, right? So make your choice. Which one do you want to be?
Okay, Carl. Real transformation is only possible when the approach towards corporate strategy changes from compliance-based regulation to a commitment towards decarbonization. Through climate governance, though climate governance through top-down approaches creates necessary regulatory structures for change, change occurs when good policy is coupled with conviction in the market. Knowing that survival requires a lower carbon economy, global companies are restructuring their resources, creating innovation in sustainability, and changing their identity to survive in the contemporary business environment. Leaders have to move beyond the boundaries set by the regulation and capitalize on sustainable business possibility. So from the intersection, what does the sweet spot look like when smart regulation perfectly aligns with genuine market conviction? And which industry are currently leading this trend?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I also believe that Malaysia is in a relatively unique position, not the only country, but yeah, you have whatever sustainability regulations that you have now. It's leaning heavily on listed companies. Majority of the companies in Malaysia are obviously not listed, like in any country. But what is unique to Malaysia is that 70%, 70, yeah, of your GDP comes from export, which means that from all the products you make in Malaysia, the vast majority is bought outside the country. And therefore, you are also heavily influenced by whatever expectations your overseas buyers have of in terms of sustainability requirements. And it's not just, and it's even a bit more complex than that, because a big part of your export from out of Malaysia to the outside world is done by foreign companies who have invested here and are producing in Malaysia. And they have to comply with requirements from their markets and from their regulators overseas. And they expect the same from their Malaysia-based suppliers, for example, right? And like For example, last year, as you can imagine, in my role as CEO of Eurochem, I dealt a fair bit with FMM, the Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers. And they're very recognizant of that, right? That we are heavily export dependent. So the sustainability discussion is not just a matter of what the local board wants or what the Malaysian government dictates through regulation. It's a market-driven thing. And last thing on that was, while I was working with them, there was a slogan that went around in that FMM community, which was no ESG equals no MSG.
I like that.
But the MSG here does not mean the food additive. MSG stands for multinational sales growth. So they were telling their Malaysian member companies, say, look, if you want to keep your foreign buyers, you want to keep your export market, you have to invest in sustainability. Otherwise, they stop buying from you.
Yeah. That's a basic requirement. Okay, let's look at this corporate strategy. I like that actually. Okay, when a business, MSC, I like that. Corporate strategy, when a business shifts from doing what is legally required to doing what is necessary for long-term survival, what is the very first operational change they must make?
Yeah, that's a very difficult one because it's also highly dependent on your industry. But let's put it this way: you might have heard the phrase, "The first step in fixing a problem is recognizing you have one." Okay, so with that I mean is as an organization, and this is what now many particularly listed companies in Malaysia are going through, is to understand, when we talk about the environmental side at least, to understand your scope 1, 2, and 3 footprints, right? How much energy do we consume in our manufacturing process, if you have one? How much energy do we use in our facilities in terms of electricity and water that we buy? And then also how much carbon is delivered by our supply chain, notably our employees, our suppliers, our customers, right? So that is obviously the first thing, measuring the problem. Then the next one is to measure the costs of doing something about it, and what technologies are available for what particular type of carbon issue. And look, what I'm talking about now is not innovative. This is what a lot of companies globally by the millions are doing right now. And then setting a target where you have identified, you have put a cost on it, and then we say, oh, the cost is a bit high. Let's set our target for 2050 or for 2040, right? And while you're doing that, suddenly 3 months later, a big flood hits your factory, 3 meters of water, and you can buy new machinery, and you're not operating for a year. I mean, I'm making a caricature now. But,
it's nice. I like that.
But what I'm saying is, and this is again tone at the top, is to make choices where we say, look, what improvements can we make now already that are economically justifiable, particularly towards our shareholders, but not just to our shareholders, also to our stakeholders, right? To our clients, to our governments, to our communities, and so on. So there's not like one operational change. It's a process you have to go through and understand that actually this is a new function in an organization, right? Sustainability is a new function that is not necessarily a silo that is the sustainability team, but it's a function also within every part of the organization. If you're in logistics, if you're in manufacturing, if you're in procurement, whatever, that you say, okay, how can we make this part of the business more sustainable? Where are the key areas of in this case, carbon footprint? Does that help you?
Yeah, I'm taking notes actually. Okay, I actually there's something come across in my mind in terms of capital realignment.
Mm-hmm.
Global capital is starting to reward deep decarbonization. How are investors separating companies with true market conviction from those merely complying with minimum regulation?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's also a little bit the old greenwashing issue. However, reporting frameworks are getting more and more stringent. They also need to be audited now, right? So that's less and less room to cheat, so to say, right? But that's talking about making sure that companies comply. The other one is, how do you evaluate organizations that go the extra mile? And that requires studying them in detail, engaging with them, looking how they perform in the markets, look what their strategies is. Do they have an annual report with 2 pages about sustainability or one with 50 pages about sustainability? I mean, there's all these areas, right? Are they in an industry where a lot of companies remain sitting on a lot of stranded assets, and is there actually an active plan to do something about it? You can see in the automotive industry, at a given moment, the market cap of Tesla was as big as Volkswagen, Mercedes, and BMW combined. So there you go. Investors are rewarding the company that is really going down the track. I mean, it's a simple example that I'm giving, but it's investors do what investors do, right? They're not just looking at a screen and 1 second later they buy 100 million worth of shares. Right? You go through a whole process of evaluating. And if for them sustainability is important, which is increasingly the case, then they will evaluate their target investee companies accordingly.
Okay, Carl, let's open up our dialogue to questions from the audience. There is quite a bit of question posted there, but I think most of the question has been covered according to our dialogue. There's one question actually, although we had talked about this, but I'd like you to go into that as well. Probably you have a different perspective, which is a capital allocation. How can financial institutions redirect trillions in capital away from male adapted projects toward climate resilience? This is a question from the audience.
Yeah, I like that question because it's something I'm in the middle of right now.
I like that too. That's the reason I'm asking you.
But it's not a silver bullet, immediate solution type of thing, right? But like, for example, one of the areas I'm active in is in the sales of high-end sustainability reporting software for financial institutions. And when we talk to the boards of some of the Malaysian banks, there are those who say, look, how can we just make sure that our reporting is done according to legal requirements? But there are also boards who say, look, in Malaysia, who say, look, we do not just want to invest in software to be compliant with our reporting. We want to use the same software to identify how we can reallocate capital to climate resilience, meaning they would, for example, go into a particular sector. Let's say they have 100 clients in palm oil. And each of these clients have now to report to the bank their carbon footprint. And they will then go to look at the data and they say, look, there are 2 out of these 100 companies who, on a relative basis, have a carbon footprint which is 3 times higher than all the other peers in their market. So then they will go to these organizations and say, look, we've noticed that you are underperforming in terms of carbon footprints. We are happy to provide you specific types of lending so you can invest in climate resilience. So this is how this is slowly shifting, right? But it's a big shift that needs to happen. And of course, banks have flip side problem as well, because they might still have loans outstanding on coal-fired power plants, for example, right? So if you now go to that power plant and say you got to shut down, how is the loan going to get paid back? So that issue is also now being worked on, how to deal with these stranded assets. Can we convert coal-fired power plants in hydrogen-based power plants where we retain some of the original infrastructure? I mean, these exercises are now all taking place. I'm a firm believer, if the world really wants to redirect trillions in capital to a certain area, it can. And just look how much money is suddenly put into data centers in a matter of what, 2-3 years, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if there were more overall global agreements across all countries that we need to do something about it, then I think these massive amounts of capital could be redirected a lot more quicker. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that response. Actually, this is something in my mind as well, but I just couldn't believe what I found out as well. But thanks for the justification from your side. But I think it's quite valid to think of what I have found. Okay, and also thanks for the question. That question really triggered us to figure that out and how the things are to be done. Okay, Carl. All right. So now we are going to change gears a little bit. We have been talking about all the concerns that we have been discussing on the show, and I would like you to be able to share your ideas and see what others listener are thinking about that in a little bit. So aligning sustainability incentive to the operation within corporate firms, agriculture, energy, and finance provides direct economic gains. For instance, in corporate operation, connecting bonuses to greenhouse gas emission and housing incentive helps to keep employees in the area and reduce overhead costs through less commuting. In agriculture and energy operation, the elimination of dependence on the grid, fertilizer, and generation of income from waste management and solar energy is achieved. Lastly, in finance, the use of a common platform such as Central Bank, which is a Bank Negara Malaysia, the JC3 for measuring climate risk reduces cost of green finance. By the way, JC3 is Joint Committee on Climate Change. Is a regulator industry collaborative action platform to build climate resilience into a financial system in Malaysia. So which is we call the JC3 here. So perverse incentive risk from that point of view. By rewarding companies based on greenhouse gas reduction, the risk of the carbon leakage arises, whereby carbon-intensive activities get dedicated to third parties. From your point of view, what are some of the ways to ensure that matrix cannot be manipulated in such a circumstances?
Can you reformulate the question? Matrix of what exactly?
What are some ways to ensure that matrix cannot be manipulated in such a circumstances, which is based on what I just mentioned about the rewarding companies based on the greenhouse gas reduction, the risk of the carbon leakage arises. The the carbon intensive activities get dedicated to third parties.
Yeah. Well, I guess I mentioned this before, right? You can have all the regulations you want in the world, but if you have no enforcement, then that also is not necessarily helpful. Of course, increasingly, your carbon reporting is subject to auditing, right? You have to provide, if you report to Bursa, you have to provide an audit trail and an audited statement. The same to Bank Negara. Of course, Bank Negara only applies to financial institutions, and Bursa only applies to listed companies. yeah, you could say, look, why don't we just consider carbon another form of air pollution? And just as you might have forms of measuring air pollution, other types of air pollutions in certain industrial zones, you could do it that way. But I'm not necessarily convinced that this is a mechanism going forward. I would say you bypass the metric issue by taxing. I've mentioned carbon tax. I can give you another example that is now increasingly working well in Europe. It relates to EPR, which is extended producer responsibility, and basically life cycle responsibility of companies. So, for example, if you're a Coca-Cola producing drinks, say in my country, in Belgium, your revenue and your sales are officially known. The government will say, look, based on this revenue number, and we've analyzed your product, we assume that this year you produced X thousand tons of plastic. So we're gonna tax you on that amount of tons, and that money is then put in a fund that is used to pay for plastic recycling. Right? So the government doesn't get the money and the company pays, right? So that's where you could do the same, right? Where the government said, look, yeah, look, we are not going to bother measuring whether you're cheating or not. You have to provide us financial statements on that basis, your type of industry, and all these metrics are and frameworks are globally available. We assume that this is your carbon footprint, hence we are charging you a certain tax on it. And so you put the burden of proof on the company, and then the company has to come forward and say, look, we invested in this and this, we measured every day, we have carbon measures all around our operations. So you have to change a little bit that language, right? It's doable. It's doable. It's just, again, a matter of wanting to do it, in my view.
Okay, Carl, look at the infrastructure for waste to energy. Monetizing the potential of waste product entails expensive localized equipment infrastructure. So from your point of view, how can one motivate smaller farmers to adopt this practice without the resources for basic technology?
Yeah, you have to look at the supply chain, right? If you particularly talk about palm oil and smallholders, yeah, they're part of supply chain. A smallholder with a farm of 2 hectares doesn't have its own palm oil mill, right? So then you shift the burden to the palm oil mill, and then you encourage the palm oil mills to support the smallholders. I mean, I don't have the exact technical answers to each of those, but in my view, your big benefit is the sheer scale of this industry. And if you unleash innovation on it, whether technological innovation or financial innovation on this sector, with the right regulatory framework to support it, and a kind of a conviction that you say, you know what, we want to crack this problem for the whole world to see and take pride in it, right? Then the economics will follow, and the sustainable benefit.
Okay, let's look at the cost. Defection cost. The total separation from the electricity grid due to self-generation in industrial settings result in a reduced customer base, increasing cost on the existing public utility grid. So from years of practice, from your understanding, also how you approach those are the stakeholders and the clients, how should energy companies address their cost and social responsibility?
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, different models have been tried all over the world, from allowing power competition to having 2 utilities, one that does the grid and the other one that does the production. In certain countries, governments have absorbed the costs of decommissioning stranded assets, right? So there's no clear answer to it. I think Malaysia is in a relatively better position because it's an energy producer and on the fossil sides, and is also has a massive potential to produce solar energy. So I think the country is on the right path there. Of course, an unforeseen buck of the trend has been the massive growth in the data center industry, because suddenly there's a surge in high capacity, high speed demand for power, which in the short run comes primarily from gas that you need to import rather than use Malaysia its own gas. So there are factors there that need to be brought back into balance. I don't think that coal will be gone by 1st of January 2027, but
No,
I
I don't
think
think so too.
all the elements are there, and gas will probably run for another 30 years. But all the elements are there to bring these things more in balance, and I think Malaysia, where it can, is doing the necessary, including also now putting more and more focus on the ASEAN power grid arrangements, right? Because this is also what saves Europe, is that imbalances at national level are kind of mitigated because you can sell power across the border, right? I'm personally quite, despite what is being said from a day-to-day basis in current times, when it comes to energy, I'm actually quite positive about Malaysia as a country and a renewable component in its energy mix going forward.
Yeah, thanks for your optimism. That was quite good. That was good to hear that. Okay, let's look at the interregional arbitrage. Under the strict sustainability guidelines in the certain regions, for instance, like JC3, Joint Committee on Climate Change, capital might flow to areas that have more lenient guidelines. So, from your point of view, how can green finance incentives compete globally yet still be stringent within local guidelines?
Well, can you give an example? Because if you got green finance incentives competing globally, then global includes local, right? So then why is local then stringent?
You have any, especially in Malaysia context? Let's look at this. Since you have been around in Malaysia quite a while, so I mean, you have approach with the authority based on that, or anything that you have come up with your framework. You have proposed it to the authority. Probably you can share with us.
Well, the only one that comes to mind now is green finance provided by multilateral institutions, like, for example, the European Investment Bank, where the European Union has allocated about 20 billion euros to Southeast Asia for investments in renewable energy and digital economy related to sustainability. But a relatively small part of that money has been lent out in the Malaysian market. And that's primarily a matter of local regulations over or on top of such kind of multilateral agencies, right? So that is an example. I think Malaysia is going to play a big catch-up this year, where if you say you're a big institutional investor overseas, you want to lend or invest in Malaysia. In the past, I might have said, well, yeah, look, who says we are not financing a greenwashing operation? But with now the current new reporting requirements, both by Bank Negara as well as by Bursa Malaysia, I think this issue is going to work itself out. Actually, brings back, since we Green Building Council, right? My discussions with the real estate sector, where with some of the players I spoke with who are just trying to comply, I said, but how do you finance your big real estate developments outside the country if you're not doing more for sustainability? And so those companies say, well, we don't need to because we find all the capital we need in Malaysia. And then there are others who say, well, actually, that's the attraction for us. Because we are doing more, we now suddenly can find bond buyers in European markets or in Australia, where in the past they would not have come here because we had nothing to show from a sustainability point of view. But that's less about local stringent guidelines. It is more about local business practice, right? Yeah, I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, great. Because there's quite complicated behind all this, because it's not just like a few minutes can be answerable for that. It's just like what actually is the foundation of the entire context behind that. You mentioned about the frameworks. Let's take along with this framework. I'm into the framework you just mentioned, regulatory frameworks, and also the market realities. The compliance track between these two, how do we prevent companies from treating regulation as a ceiling to reach rather than a floor to build upon?
How do you motivate them to see it as a ceiling?
Yeah.
Well,
how do we prevent companies from treating regulation as a ceiling to reach rather than a floor to build upon?
Yeah. You stop buying their product.
Okay.
I mean, it's a market effect. That's what I mean, right? Ultimately, they're not breaking any laws, so they do what is compliance-wise required from them, but do the market its work, right? And with the market, I mean both the financing market as well as the customer market, the labor market. I think this is how this is going to work out ultimately. And yes, different markets have different levels of maturity. I mean, an example came to mind is, like you said in the introduction, I worked quite a few years with PwC. And recently, some of the partners told me, even as a consulting company, you interview a fresh grad from university, and who say, like, before I decide to work for you, can you tell me what are you doing in the sustainability space, right? so, and if then you say,
I don't care. I said, I don't care.
We are just complying with the laws. Then you say, well, look, then I go work for your competition, you know. So no, but I'm simplifying it. But I think ultimately this will be a market-driven effect. Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the commercial scalability and green tech. So I'm going to get into the ESG fund. Capital misallocation. Billions flow into software and ESG funds, but heavy industry like cement and steel need hard infrastructure capital. How do we redirect that cash, in your suggestion, or probably in your point of view?
I'm not sure why we should redirect. As in,
probably you have a different view.
I'm not the one saying that Siemens cannot finance its growth because all the money goes through venture capitalists to startups. I don't think that is the case. Besides, I believe Siemens has its own venture capital fund, which is also funding in parallel startups in a certain areas of technology. To be honest, current times, last year and a half, the venture capital markets have dried up a little bit. Just talk to any owner of a startup these days, how easy or hard it is to raise a Series A raise or something. Like it's not that straightforward anymore, because increasingly technology startups have to prove a shorter run to profitability or a relevance, right? Are you actually fixing a real problem? Now there are still a lot who do, don't get me wrong, but I have not heard any large organizations say, look, we cannot find investors or bank loans anymore because all the money goes to startups and software companies. That's not, to my knowledge, the case. Yeah, but maybe you have the evidence for it. I'm happy to understand.
I'm still looking for that actually. So that's the reason I put forward my concern because of the surrounding. I've spoken to a few big corporations about this issue as well, but I couldn't really get into so-called the proper real set of the evidence that are still like
Yeah, the hypothesis needs to be tested.
Yeah, actually, it's still hypothetical, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the shifting from the compliance to purpose, which is this is something come across in my mind earlier on because some of the key point you mentioned, and also go back to the beginning, we talked about that earlier on, shifting from compliance to purpose. Let's look at the legacy asset write-downs. Transitioning to a low carbon strategy means stranding valuable fossil fuel linked asset. Who absorbed that financial heat, in your point of view?
Ultimately, all of us, right? But in a practical terms, in the immediate term, look, it's going to be a combination of shareholders and government. I believe. We had the case, although now they're regretting it heavily, but we had the case in Belgium with the exiting out of nuclear energy after the Fukushima crisis, where you suddenly had stranded assets, and then the government, obviously with taxpayer money, that's why I'm saying ultimately we will pay, but with taxpayer money and some money of the shareholders of the nuclear power plants, a 10-year exit scenario was rolled out. Meanwhile, just been halted because they now think we need to reverse that decision. But that's nuclear energy. I don't see that happening with coal plants, for example. I think maybe there might be room also for governments to communicate clearly to taxpayers and say, look, we cannot just project these coal plants into space. We need to do something. We propose that we're going to roll out an exiting scenario for these stranded assets that is going to cost the taxpayer this amount of money over the next 10 years. Do you still want to vote for us or not? I mean, but I don't see any other means. I mean, you can say you're going to tax renewable energy and use that money to pay for the closure of coal-fired power plants. That's a little bit what's happening now, actually, right? Solar energy is not necessarily, in large volumes, the cheapest form of energy in the market. So that probably needs to be phased out. I mean, for me, I'm fundamentally convinced if the world as a whole recognizes that we really now need to do something and no more arguing US versus China and so forth, I believe mankind is ingenious enough to say, look, technologically, economically, financially, we can, socially, we can fix these problems, you know. But in the meantime, each country, each government works out solutions that are achievable, right? So,
what Yeah, which is I think the context is what is good for me. So put it this way, what is good for me, not for you. So there's a reason they always like. I mean, everybody is being selfish. You can see that. So how the way they respond and all this, all about what is good for me, not good for you first. So
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay. I think we are aware that the dialogue of today is coincide with the World Environment Day, which is the last Friday on the 5th of June. So let's look at this World Environment Day from the global economic divide. I think you talked about this earlier on. World Environment Day, World Environment Day is global, but the global South needs cheap energy to lift people out of poverty.
Hmm.
In your point of view, how can developed nations demand compliance without funding the transition?
Well, it's not 100% true that they are not funding the transition, right?
Okay.
Uh, as I was just saying, like the European Union has allocated 20 billion euros to Southeast Asia. There was, you might remember, a couple of years ago, there was a big climate conference in Egypt where the world agreed, for example, to give Indonesia 20 billion US dollars to exit its coal power plants. I mean, meanwhile, that has been halted, but we've been looking at this, right? And it's not nations that demand the planet. You know, if all of us die because the temperature goes up by 10 degrees, the nations will still be there. The people will be gone, right? So ultimately, it's not nations that demand compliance. It's mankind. It's people, right? And so without funding, well, yeah, how do you define that, right? So if you talk about products, people want sustainable products. Let's simplify in the West, but they are made in Malaysia, but they're paying for their product, right? So somehow there is a financial transfer mechanism, but also make a proposal, right? What transition do you want to be funded and how much? Because it's one thing saying in sloganesque style, the West has chopped down their forest 500 years ago, so now if you don't want us to do the same, you have to pay for it. But that's not practical, right? You have to come with a workable arrangement and then make a proposal, right? That's what I would do, rather than give us money. If that makes sense.
Yeah, great. There's a lot of things that need to be dealt with eventually, but of course, there's much more to talk about that. Okay, I think it's about time. I think we are done for today. If you look at the time what we are having now, okay, we shall take this as the end of our conversation, Carl. Thank you very much for participating in Cross Discourse. It is really a pleasure having you here today. That is awesome. Thank you very much. And also thank you so much for the time that you have taken out to join this conversation and for sharing your very inside ideas. I took down a lot of notes actually. Thank you very much. And a lot of things you share, it was really enlightened to me. Your contribution certainly make us think hard and reflect. There are probably a lot of more things to ask, and then when I see you again, it will not be surprising if we see each other again just to discuss those are the questions raised to the certain extent. So thanks again, Carl.
Thank you very much for having me, Stephen. And also, I salute and wish the Malaysian Green Building Council all the best in their further journey towards promoting sustainable construction. I think you're on a very good course and trajectory there. But thanks
We are
again for having
doing
me.
we are doing more than just a construction. We are doing a lot actually.
Sorry.
So we are doing circular economy, and even we are getting to green finance as well, and global alignment. Those are the things which is anything to do with green is our business. So we are not just building and construction. We are more than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But by the way, thank you very much, Carl. Really, really appreciate it. So I hope to see you again, Carl.
Thank you. Thank you. See you soon.
Okay. Right. That was wonderful, actually. So there's a lot of things which is Carl has shared with us. So a little sharing here based on Carl. The economic data clearly demonstrate that purpose-driven climate action outperforms traditional compliance model, which is what Carl mentioned this. Global research shows that companies with robust environmental social governance, which is the ESG, this is a hot topic at the moment, ESG frameworks achieve a 4.8 times higher market valuation growth compared to laggards, heavily driven by decarbonization strategies. This economic shift is further supported by the clean energy sector, where solar and wind power now generate electricity to cost up to 33% cheaper than fossil fuel alternative in major global economies. Additionally, sustainable supply chain, which is Carl mentioned this earlier on, reduce operational costs by up to 20%, proving that low carbon businesses models yield longer than commercial returns and resilient financial positioning. Economic survival is what drives through climate action rather than mere compliance, in much the same way that one consults a physician for better health, which is this is the analogy come from Carl. Companies and governments need to embrace sustainability for themselves to flourish. Right, the takeaway points I'd like to share with you for consideration. First, moving beyond the rule book. While legal compliance represents the bare minimum, having a mission-oriented strategy goes beyond. In the future, those organizations that will succeed will be those who consider the health of the planet to be cornerstone of their business. Driving force. Second, driving force. Regulation become extremely effective once they cease to be barriers to progress and start being guidelines. Good governance neither stifles nor hinders growth. On the contrary, it facilitates innovative green technology by reducing risk. Third, the nature of success. Every year, World Environment Day offers a reminder that natural world operates according to its own rules and not according to the quarterly financial performance. Sustainability is crucial for economic success, seeing it is impossible to sustain any economy without a healthy planet. Ultimately, the move towards a low-carbon economy will represent the ultimate stress test for leaders today. It was highlighted by Carl earlier on too. The success of this transition will not be achieved by those who waited to be compelled by law. It will be accomplished only by those who were able to realize that planetary health and business success are intertwined. In conclusion, we have explored the core themes of this evening topic and how they impact our daily lives. As a final thought, I encourage you to take just one of the insights we discussed as applied in this week. There's many we have talked about this. Please, you can always refer back to our YouTube link. The link is always there. Small intentional changes are what will lead to meaningful growth. On that note, and we will have to call it a day for this evening. And so for our technical master and MGBC secretary, a big wave from here. Cross Discourse series is a live podcast organized by Malaysia GBC Academy from Malaysian Green Building Council MGBC, supported by Mila University. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, keep learning and stay curious. Till then, take care and each other. Have a nice evening. Stay tuned. Also, good night.